There is a stage on the healing journey that no one prepares you for. It comes after the initial breakthroughs, after you've done the courageous shadow work, after you've started to set boundaries and speak your truth. You expect to feel relief, joy, a constant sense of liberation. But instead, a strange and hollow ache begins to set in. Old friendships suddenly feel shallow. Conversations that once felt easy now feel draining. The life you so carefully built suddenly feels like a room that has become too small for you. You feel lonely, even when you are surrounded by people. A quiet, persistent sense of disconnection. If this is where you find yourself right now, I want you to take a deep breath and hear this with every cell in your body. You are not failing. You are not going backwards. This feeling is not a punishment for your growth. It is the evidence of it. You have simply arrived at a sacred and often painful borderland. The space between who you used to be and who you are becoming. The great psychologist Carl Jung had a name for this profound journey. He called it individuation, the path to wholeness. And he knew that this path leads directly through this feeling of disconnection. This video is a map for that borderland. It is a guide for the person who feels like they are outgrowing their own life. We will not try to fix this feeling. We will learn to honor it as the fertile, holy ground where your true self is finally beginning to take root. To understand this feeling of disconnection, we must first understand the fundamental nature of growth. Growth is not just an accumulation. It is not just adding new skills, new insights, new strengths to the person you already are. That is learning. True growth, true transformation, is an act of subtraction. It is a shedding, a letting go, a death of the old to make way for the new. Think of it like this. For years, you have lived in a house. Let's call this house your old identity. You knew every room, every creaky floorboard, every crack in the wall. It might not have been a perfect house. Perhaps it was a bit small. Perhaps the plumbing was faulty. Perhaps some of the rooms were dark and full of painful memories. But it was your house. It was familiar. It was predictable. And in its predictability, there was a strange kind of safety. The shadow work you've been doing is a process of renovation. You started letting light into the dark rooms. You started fixing the faulty plumbing of your emotional responses. You started knocking down walls to create more space. But at some point, you realize a profound truth. You haven't just been renovating the house. You've been growing, and you are now too big for the house. Your soul can no longer be contained within those old walls. This is the source of the disconnection, the feeling that your old life is an ill-fitting suit. The friendships that were built to support the old you, the you who was a people pleaser, the you who never disagreed, the you who hid your light, those friendships were perfectly suited for the old house, but they may not have a place in the new one you are building. When you sit with an old friend and the conversation feels hollow, it is not necessarily because they are a bad person. It is because you are speaking a new language, the language of boundaries, of self-worth, of authenticity, and they are still speaking the old language you once shared. The language of complaint, of gossip, of seeking external validation. And you realize you are no longer fluent in that tongue. That is disconnection. When your old career path, the one that once gave you a sense of security and identity, now feels meaningless and draining, it is not because you are lazy or ungrateful. It is because your soul is calling you towards a work that aligns with your true self, not just your ego's need for approval. That is disconnection.
Let's imagine Chloe again. For years, her social life revolved around a group of friends where the primary bond was complaining about their partners and their jobs. It was a comfortable, if negative, form of connection. After months of shadow work, Chloe started focusing on her own accountability and growth. The next time she met her friends, they began the familiar ritual of complaint. But Chloe stayed silent. She had nothing to add. She didn't want to complain about her partner, she wanted to work on her relationship. She didn't want to complain about her job, she was exploring new possibilities. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of loneliness. She was physically there, but her spirit was somewhere else. She had outgrown the house of that friendship, and the silence was the sound of the disconnection. This is what Carl Jung meant by the process of individuation. It is the journey of becoming an individual, literally a self that can no longer be divided or merged with the collective expectations of others. It is the process of differentiating yourself from the scripts of your family, your culture, and even your own past. And this process, by its very nature, is a lonely one. You must, for a time, stand apart. You must be willing to leave the warmth and familiarity of the tribe to venture into the wilderness of your own soul. The pain of this disconnection is the grief of letting go. It is the mourning for the person you used to be. There was a comfort in that person. She knew the rules. She knew how to be liked. She knew how to fit in. Letting her go feels like a death, because in many ways, it is. You are grieving the loss of old certainties, the loss of friendships that can't grow with you, the loss of an identity that, while limiting, was at least predictable. This is not a sign that you have made a mistake. It is the sign of a successful shedding. Like a snake who has just shed its skin, you are for a time raw, tender, and exquisitely vulnerable. The world feels a bit too bright, a bit too loud. This is not a breakdown. It is the tender state of a breakthrough. You are standing in the rubble of your old house, and all around you is an empty space. A terrifying and yet sacredly empty space. The question is not how quickly we can fill this space. The question Carl Jung would ask is, can you bear the sacredness of this emptiness long enough to hear what wants to grow there?
So you stand in the emptiness, the silence left behind by the old roles, the old conversations, the old certainties. And the first impulse of the human ego in an empty space is to fill it, quickly, with anything. New distractions, new relationships, new goals. Anything to avoid the profound discomfort of the void. But what if this emptiness is not a void to be feared? What if it is a space to be honored? This is where we must make a crucial distinction. A distinction between loneliness and solitude. Our culture uses these words interchangeably, but they are worlds apart. Loneliness is the pain of an absence. It is a feeling of lack, a poverty of connection. It is a state of passive suffering, where we are waiting for something or someone outside of ourselves to come and rescue us from our isolation. Solitude, on the other hand, is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the presence of the self. It is the rich, intentional act of choosing to be with yourself. It is not about a lack of connection with others. It is about a deepening of the connection with your own soul. The painful feeling of disconnection you are experiencing is a sacred invitation. It is an invitation to alchemize your loneliness into solitude, to stop looking outside for what can only be found within. Imagine a woman, let's call her Maria, a 50-year-old teacher who recently went through this. Her entire adult life, her weekends were filled with social obligations. Dinner parties, family gatherings, community events. She was always busy, always connected. But after she started her shadow work journey, she began to find these events draining. The conversations felt superficial. The connections felt conditional. She started to politely decline invitations. And suddenly, her weekends were empty. At first, the silence in her home was deafening. The loneliness was a physical ache. She felt a frantic urge to call someone, to make plans, to fill the space. But she remembered the invitation. Instead of running from the emptiness, she decided to lean into it. One Saturday, instead of turning on the TV, she made a cup of tea, sat in her favorite chair, and just sat. She listened to the sounds of her own home. She noticed the way the light fell across the floor. She felt the rising and falling of her own breath. And in that quiet space, other things began to rise. Feelings she had been too busy to feel. Grief for a friendship that had faded. Anger about a boundary that had been crossed years ago. A quiet longing for she wasn't even sure what. It was uncomfortable. It was messy. But she didn't run. She was practicing solitude. She was holding space for her own inner world. This is the winter of the soul that Carl Jung often spoke of. In our productivity-obsessed culture, we fear winter. We see it as a time of death, of barrenness, of inactivity. But nature knows that winter is not an end. It is a vital, necessary period of rest, integration, and preparation. It is the time when the roots grow deeper. It is the time when the energy that was spent on external blooming is drawn inward to consolidate, to heal, to gather strength for the spring to come. Your feeling of disconnection is your soul's winter. It is a sign that you have been doing tremendous work. The work of blooming, of growing, of shedding. And now, it is time for the roots to deepen. The work in this phase is not about pushing or striving. It is not about figuring out your next step. The ego wants a 5-year plan. The soul simply asks for your presence, right now. The work is to cultivate a new kind of relationship, a relationship with the silence, to learn that the emptiness is not empty. It is pregnant. It is full of the wisdom that can only be heard when the noise of the external world has faded. This is the space where you finally hear the quiet whisper of your own intuition, where the creative ideas you've been searching for suddenly emerge, fully formed, where you finally understand what you truly want, not what you've been told you should want. This is the space where the self, the organizing center of your psyche, can finally make its voice heard above the chatter of the persona. But to access this wisdom, we must be willing to endure the discomfort of not knowing. We must be willing to sit in the borderland without a map. We must trust that this fallow period is not a sign of failure, but of fertility. The path to wholeness, the path of individuation, is not a straight line. It is a spiral. It spirals inward into the darkness and the quiet of the self, and then it spirals outward, bringing that newfound wisdom and authenticity back into the world. This feeling of disconnection is your soul's winter. It is a sign that you have been doing tremendous work, the work of blooming, of growing, of shedding. And now, it is time for the roots to deepen. The work in this phase is not about pushing or striving. It is about cultivating a new kind of relationship, a relationship with the silence. To learn that the emptiness is not empty. It is pregnant. It is full of the wisdom that can only be heard when the noise of the external world has faded. This is the space where you finally hear the quiet whisper of your own intuition, where the creative ideas you've been searching for suddenly emerge, fully formed, where you finally understand what you truly want, not what you've been told you should want. This is the space where the self, the organizing center of your psyche, can finally make its voice heard above the chatter of the persona. But to access this wisdom, we must be willing to endure the discomfort of not knowing. We must be willing to sit in the borderland without a map. We must trust that this fallow period is not a sign of failure, but of fertility. The path to wholeness, the path of individuation, is not a straight line. It is a spiral. It spirals inward, into the darkness and the quiet of the self, and then it spirals outward, bringing that newfound wisdom and authenticity back into the world. This feeling of disconnection is your soul's winter. It is a sign that you have been doing tremendous work, the work of blooming, of growing, of shedding. And now, it is time for the roots to deepen. The work in this phase is not about pushing or striving. It is about learning. It is about being. It is about learning how to be in the present moment without agenda. The work is to cultivate a new kind of relationship with the silence. To learn that the emptiness is not empty. It is pregnant. It is full of the wisdom that can only be heard when the noise of the external world has faded. So if you are in that empty room right now, don't be in a rush to furnish it. Don't be in a rush to invite guests. First, learn the shape of the room. Feel the texture of the silence. Look out the window and see what the view is really like now that you are alone. This is not an abandonment. It is a homecoming. And the guest of honor is you.
The homecoming. It sounds so beautiful, so peaceful. But the reality of this inward journey can feel anything but. It can feel disorienting, frightening, unmoored. To simply be told to trust the process can feel like an impossible task when the very ground beneath your feet has dissolved. So how do we navigate this borderland? How do we anchor ourselves when we feel like we are drifting in an endless sea? The answer is not to search for a new shore immediately. The answer is to learn how to build a raft. A raft made of small, intentional practices that can hold you right here in the middle of the ocean. These practices are the heart of shadow work during the individuation process. They are not about finding answers, but about learning to live with the questions. I want to offer you a powerful, practical tool for building your raft. It is a journaling practice, a dialogue across time, designed to bridge the gap between the person you were, the person you are, and the person you are becoming. Let's call it the 3 letters. Sometime this week, find a quiet hour for yourself. Take out your journal or just a few pieces of paper, and you will write 3 letters. The first letter is a letter of gratitude and farewell to your past self, the self you are letting go of, the people pleaser, the one who stayed silent, the one who built the old house. Do not write to her with anger or judgment. Write to her with profound compassion. Thank her. Thank her for the survival skills she developed. Thank her for keeping you safe. Thank her for the friendships and experiences she brought you,
even the ones you have now outgrown. Acknowledge her sacrifices, and then, gently, lovingly, say goodbye. Let her know that her service is complete, that you, the adult, are here now to take over. This is an act of honoring your past, not erasing it. The second letter is a letter of curiosity to your present self, the self who is right here in the middle of the discomfort. This is a check-in. Ask yourself, without any need for an immediate answer, what am I truly feeling right now beneath the anxiety? Is it grief? Is it fear? Is it excitement? What is this empty space asking of me? What is one small thing that brings me a flicker of genuine, quiet joy? Not what should, but what does. A cup of tea, a song, a walk in the park. What am I afraid will happen if I stay in this not knowing phase for a little longer? This letter is about being a compassionate witness to your own present experience. You are simply mapping the territory you are in without judging the landscape. And the third, final letter is a letter from your future self. Imagine the you that is 5 or 10 years down the road, the you that has navigated this borderland, the you that is living a more whole, more authentic life, the you that is the embodiment of your deepest potential, your true self. Now let that version of you write a letter back to the you that is reading this right now. What would she say? What reassurance would she offer? What wisdom would she share about the pain and confusion of this current moment? Would she tell you to hurry up? Or would she tell you to be patient? Would she tell you that this emptiness was a mistake, or that it was the most important, fertile ground of your entire life? Listen. Let her speak. Write down her words. This is not just an imaginative exercise. Carl Jung believed deeply in the reality of the self as an intelligent guiding force within the psyche. This letter is an act of active imagination. It is a way of tapping into the intuitive wisdom that already exists within you. It is your own inner compass speaking to you from your destination. This practice of the 3 letters is not a one-time fix. It is a tool you can return to whenever you feel lost or unmoored. It is a way to create your own anchor. When you feel the grief of the past pulling you back, reread your letter of farewell. When you feel overwhelmed by the uncertainty of the present, reread your letter of compassionate witness. And when you lose hope for the future, reread the letter from the wise, whole person you are already on your way to becoming. This is how you learn to hold yourself. This is how you alchemize loneliness into a profound and generative solitude. You are creating a conscious connection between your past, present, and future selves, weaving them together into a single, coherent story, the story of your individuation. The journey through this borderland is not easy. It demands courage, patience, and a radical trust in the unseen. But you are not just wandering aimlessly. You are on a sacred path. The path that every great story, every myth, every legend has ever told. The path of the hero who must leave the familiar world behind to discover the treasure that can only be found in the wilderness of their own heart.
And so you learn to build a raft, not to escape the ocean, but to learn its currents, to find your center in the midst of its vast, unpredictable beauty. We began this journey feeling the sharp, confusing pain of disconnection, a feeling that we were lost, unmoored, and perhaps had made a terrible mistake by choosing to grow. We then traveled into the heart of this experience,
understanding it not as a failure, but as a sacred and necessary shedding. The shadow work of letting go of the life that was no longer ours to live. We learn to distinguish between the poverty of loneliness and the richness of solitude. We came to see this empty space not as a void, but as the winter of the soul that Carl Jung described, a fertile, fallow ground where the roots of our true self can deepen. And finally, we were given a tangible practice, the 3 letters, to build our own raft, to anchor ourselves in the storm, and to create a compassionate dialogue between our past, present, and future selves. This path of individuation, this journey to wholeness, is the most courageous one a person can take. It asks you to trade the comfort of belonging to the tribe for the profound and sometimes challenging integrity of belonging to yourself. As you learn to sit in this sacred emptiness, as you learn to trust its wisdom, you will find that new things begin to grow. Not the things you thought you should want, but the things your soul has been quietly longing for. A new sense of purpose, a new kind of creativity, a new form of relationship built on authenticity, not on obligation. But this new, more authentic way of being will inevitably bring you face to face with one of the oldest and most powerful human fears, the fear of conflict. As you become more yourself, you will no longer be able to absorb the projections of others. You will no longer be able to stay silent in the face of things that violate your newfound values. You will be called to speak up, to disagree, to hold your ground. And this can feel terrifying, especially for those of us who have spent a lifetime as peacemakers. How do we find the courage to face conflict without losing ourselves? How do we use our voice with both strength and compassion? This is the next great frontier of our shadow work, and it is exactly what we will be exploring in our next journey together. I invite you to subscribe so that you do not have to walk that path alone. For now, your work is to tend to your own sacred ground, to trust the winter of your soul. I invite you to join our community of fellow travelers. In the comments below, share one word that describes how this in-between space feels for you. It could be lonely, it could be peaceful, it could be scary, it could be hopeful. There is no right or wrong answer. By sharing, we create a collective map of this borderland, reminding each other that while the path may be solitary, we are never truly alone. Remember, this feeling of disconnection is not your final destination. It is the cleared and consecrated ground upon which you will finally build your true home.